Hello, everybody, and welcome to number one in what is going to be called the Masters Interviews, which is basically a podcast style thing that you can sit and listen to, possibly while painting or hobbying, and you can listen to me jabber on with somebody far more interested and experienced than me in the hobby, who hopefully you might have seen or heard of online or somewhere else. And they act like a special guest, and we're going to delve into their minds and their passion and talk a little bit about how they got where they are in the hobby, and talk a bit about what advice they could pass on, particularly to sort of new starters and sort of intermediate type people like myself. And I am chuffed to say that number one on the Masters Interviews is none other than Yarkshire Gamer, or Yorkshire Gamer, who is Ken Reilly. Hello, Ken.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for that lovely welcome.
No problem.
It's Yarkshire Gamer because that's how we speak up here.
I was going to say, what is the correct term? Do I call you Mr. Gamer, Mr. Yorkshire? What do I... So
Ken will do nicely.
Brilliant. So for the geographically impaired, Ken, particularly our friends over the pond or where things are upside down, where are you from exactly, roughly, in the United Kingdom?
From God's own county of Yorkshire. If you look at a map of Great Britain, it's the giant shining light in the northeastern corner. And I live sort of in between Leeds and Bradford, two major cities in the area of Yorkshire.
And also, for people who don't know, Ken's got a very sort of really useful blog, full of all the loads of updates, all the different stuff he does, and I encourage you to. We'll plug all the stuff at the end, but I encourage you to check it out and have a look at the blog. There's also a Facebook page, a YouTube page as well, where he documents what he's doing, and it's just a fascinating thing to look at because he's got a real selection of time periods, really well documented. So for a bit of inspiration, particularly if you're new, it's a really good place to go, and it's somewhere that I found fairly early on. Looking at the blog and stuff like that. So just to, I mean, this, we'll go into all of the stuff that you've got up on there, Ken. But just for to sort of wind back a little bit, when did you first pick up a miniature? Did you start off in the sort of fantasy side of things, the airfix side of things, or did you go straight into historicals? Where and when did it happen?
It's probably the story of the little boy who never grew up. I was big into toy soldiers when I was 9, 10. I remember distinctly we would always go down on a Saturday to the local store, and I was allowed, I don't know, £1 pocket money or whatever it was in those days, which was just enough to buy a box of airfix figures or a tank. And I was absolutely fascinated with it at that age. And I wasn't gaming then, but I had an interest in soldiers, plastic soldiers and model kits. And then the gaming side of it started to come in when I was about 11 or 12. And I started to think, what more can I do with this than... And I was rolling marbles at them and doing stuff like that. And there was a couple of mates who we'd do the same thing, and I thought there must be something more to this. And then I picked up, I went to the local library, which was the internet in those days.
So just so we know, without giving you exact age away, what era are we talking about? Like when you're 11, 12, roughly when? What period?
Yeah, I'm talking about the early 80s, the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
So I'm probably from like the second generation of gamers, if you like.
Yeah.
First generation would be your Peter Gilders and etc. And I remember distinctly going along to the library and finding this magical labyrinth of books on toy soldiers. I thought I was the only person who had them.
Oh, wow.
And I got into these books, and there was Airfix did a number of like little books on different periods. There's a World War II wargaming book and a Napoleonic wargaming book. And then one day, probably about 12 or 13, I was booking a book out of the library, and the guy who was there booking the books out was a young lad, probably 15, 16, and he was a gamer.
Brilliant.
A
Okay.
lad called Sean, and he sort of introduced me to a group of gamers around that area, around my hometown, and that's how it all started. And I started gaming, sort of, an early teenage, and then I've never really stopped.
Never stopped. So you'd never had a break, because that seems relatively common, that people will dabble a bit when they're young. They'll have this whopping great break, and then at some point in later life they'll come back into it with a vengeance, kind of thing. There was no break for you at all, which explains your collections, I
Yeah,
suppose. There's no
huge
break.
collections of figures. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a hoarder. I never chuck things out.
Right. Right.
So I got rid of my. I remember I got rid of my ultra modern 6mm British Army, which was 1984, sort of chieftains and challengers. That's now come back in
Wow.
vogue. So that's the only army I've ever sold. So I'm regretting that now.
Do you regret it? Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. That's what people say, isn't it? No one's ever sold anything they then don't regret later.
Yeah, it's very, very true. So no, I've never stopped completely. I've had periods where I've become more of a toy soldier collector than a gamer. Around the time when you have kids and you've got other things on the go, I would still paint to relax and paint. That's my thing with it. But it would I wasn't gaming that much.
Right.
But then over the recent years, I've got more time, and I've got my own dedicated games room in the house that features quite a lot on the Yorkshire Gamer blog, and that's where we play all our games, because we can have them all set up and leave them for weeks and weeks at a time.
Just leave them there, and then come back to them.
Yeah, so there's a lot. Sometimes you're restricted, and people are restricted by the games they can play by the time and the location that they have. So if they're going to a local club and they've got 2-3 hours maybe, you can only play a certain size of game and a certain level of complexity, where if you've got a board in a house, you just play, and then you go for fish and chips at lunch, and you sit down and have a chat, and nobody's saying you've got to clear that up because you were leaving at 6 o'clock, and then you just come back the week after and carry on. There's no time pressure.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I'd love to do that one day. Not quite there yet. I've got a board now, but it's in the garage. I have to come out of the garage onto the dining table, but
Oh, that's good. That's the start. That's the start.
Yeah, it's a start. Yeah. So, what was your first army then? What period was it? Do you remember where you say what that is a done army? Do you remember what kind of period it was and what models they were?
The first figures, I distinctly remember the first proper wargame figures I bought, well, outside of Airfix, and they were 15mm Napoleonics.
Right.
The guys that
that's a hell of a period to kick off in. Well, you went straight in there. Yeah.
I currently own 6,500 15mm Napoleonics.
Wow.
Wow.
Are they mainly British, French? What are they?
Well, at the time, the guys I was playing with had got one guy was into Prussians, one guy was into French, and they needed somebody to start getting some British figures. So I started on British, and probably about a third to a half of those 6,000 figures are British, and then over the years, I've started to. I've got French, I've got Russians, I've got Prussians, just to mean that I've always got stuff to game against here. Because there's a regular group of people who come here, but if they don't come and they can't come for such whatever reason, there's always a battle pit army here for somebody else to use.
Wow.
So I'll put a picture of the first figures that I ever painted.
Yes, please. That'd be brilliant.
I've still got them in my army. They are now 30. Well, over. I painted them when I was 11, so they're 32 years old.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. You still got those. A lot of people I don't think would still have them, so it's great you still got them. Yeah. Never ever get rid of those.
Yeah, no, they've been rebased a few times, but they've never been. They're
Of
still
course.
there.
Yeah, yeah. There's not a day goes by when I get up in the morning and think I hate my bases. I want to
Yeah.
change them. Yeah. Brilliant. So you hinted there. So you've got. Did you say 6,000 15 mil? So
Yeah,
do
about
you know how many
6,000, I think.
figures you own? How many painted figures you own?
I have absolutely no idea.
No.
It's certainly well over 10,000.
Mm.
If the 15 mil Napoleonics are 6,500, and they're probably one of, I don't know, 20 or 30 different collections, I tend to call them, for like periods.
Wow.
So and then do you call 6 mil figure a figure the same as a 28 mil figure? One of
That's
those
a good
things,
point.
isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, well over 10,000, probably closer to 20,000, I would think.
Sure.
Which is a very large number.
That is a lot. That's an awful lot. And then, so starting off with 50 mil Napoleonics, then, and then, am I right in thinking probably one of the last things you did 28 millimeter World War II? Is that looking at the blog, or is that?
Yeah, the last post that's come on the blog, I did a review of. I do a feature on Yorkshire Gamer called Troops on Parade.
Yeah.
Which is basically just an excuse for me to get a collection out.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
put it all out and just.
By the way, if you're listening to this and you've not seen this section on the Yorkshire Gamer blog, get on there. Find on the right hand side, there's a Troops on Parade section on the right hand side where Ken's put up some amazing photographs of some of his, I suppose, some of his sort of marquee collections. And if you want to get inspired for 10 minutes, or if you've lost a bit of motivation, get on there. And the last thing that you've done is these great pictures of your British Desert Force 1941.
That collection's been going for 6 or 7 years.
Really?
And there was a big spike in production just before Christmas. I do a painting challenge every year, which we might talk about later on. And I try and theme each year. And this year I decided to get rid of all my tanks that have been sat around in a box unpainted for about 3 years.
Right.
So I knocked through about 40 or 50 vehicles, 28 mil vehicles during last year. So that's gone up because that's the newest. Sorry, that's kind of completed a project that's on the blog at the moment. That's it. There might be a couple of vehicles added to it here and there, but that's more or less it. But the newest project is probably, I'm just starting a 28 mil Ancients, or revisiting 28 mil Ancients. But probably Italian Wars, 28 mil Italian Wars is the latest big army that I've completed.
Sure, and that was is that the Papal Army that?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it might not surprise you to say, no, that's probably one of my favourite things I've seen that you've done, because it's
certainly the one that's had the biggest reaction.
Yeah.
The different World War II is always the most popular thing that I put on a blog. If I put a dog with a sticker with World War II around its neck, it would get more visits than an exquisitely painted World War I naval model. But the Italian War stuff has really, really taken off, and I've got a lot of interest in that. I've got some interest. I can't possibly talk about it, but I've had interest from companies about books and stuff like that. So
really,
it's kind of lit up the blog and the Yorkshire Gamer name quite a bit. That army.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I love the Papal Army because it's sort of pretty much my favourite period kind of thing. It's the closest thing you've got, I suppose, on there on this section anyway to Wars of the Roses army, I suppose. That's why it drew my eye to it, which is very much my sort of passion kind of thing. Is there not a Wars of Roses army on there? I've not found one. I suppose
there isn't. No, it's something that I haven't done, and it's still a raw memory up here.
Right.
Those folk from the other side of the hill with the
long memories.
We don't like them. We don't like them.
No.
So, I'd already got Crusades medieval army.
Right.
And there's a short jump from there, tactics-wise, to the Italian War. So the Wars
Sure.
of the Roses is something that just it's not piqued my interest as yet.
Well, you'll come round one day,
Exactly.
and then I'll be on there. Yeah, good. But yeah, it's an amazing collection. There's a sort of series of collections, and what I like about it is it must have inspired a lot of people, not just me, who stumble across it. At what point did you decide? Because I do find there's some people who they're not internet phobic as such, but they're just not too fussed about it. So they'll do things on Facebook and stuff, but what I like about your stuff is you got these things that all link together. So there is a Facebook page, there is a YouTube as well. You clearly put a lot of effort and thought into that, and you clearly you must have met a lot of people through it. What made you decide to because that must take work in itself? What made you decide to start documenting it in that way? Is there a particular reason you went for it, kind of thing?
Yeah, there's probably 2 or 3 things that came together that sort of made me decide, really. And I'm not massively tech savvy. I can get away and do bits and pieces of it. And I did start trying to do a blog a long time ago, and really failed on the tech side of it. So it's been going. Yorkshire Gamer itself has been going for 7 years. Which doesn't sound that long a time, really. There's some blogs have been going a lot longer than that. And I'd tried about 5 years beforehand and just failed tech-wise. And then we were doing a lot. I'd started gaming big time at a friend's house, and I thought, wouldn't it be really nice if I could just document, mostly for myself, what we're doing, just so I can look back and have memories of drinking Guinness and playing games in people's houses.
So stuff's easy to find, I suppose, as well, isn't it? If you've got it up there, you may as well put it up there. Yeah. That's kind of one of the reasons why I started tweeting and stuff. Is because I can just quickly go back and think, well, what did I do when and what did it look like? And it's quite easy, isn't it, to compare something you did a long time ago to something that you did now. You've got to filter through a load of stuff, have you? So
so good. I've done that, and I'd also I'd started to read a lot of other blogs. I'd started to use blogs myself as a resource as opposed to buying books and what have you. And I'm one of these people who design stuff, and I make my own rules and I make my own scenarios and stuff. And I was probably feeling guilty, probably too much of a word, but I was thinking, I'm taking quite a lot of this out of other people's blogs. I remember there's one called Steve's Balagan. That's got loads of scenarios and stuff on it. It's brilliant blog. And I thought, well, why don't I give a bit back and start putting scenarios and stuff on, and painting tutorials and stuff like that. And then it kind of took off, and as new social media platforms came on board, I tried a few here and there that I didn't like, and I've stuck with the ones that we've spoke about already.
Yeah, sure. No, that's really interesting. I think the other thing I was going to ask you a bit about is, so having done all this for such a long period of time, and now you've got this wealth of experience, and talking about feeling like you need to pass on some of that knowledge. One thing I sort of noticed is that at the moment, particularly you being the exception because of you started sort of earlier, and you're talking about basically you kicked off because you met somebody in the library who was a gamer. It was almost a chance encounter before the internet. One thing I've sort of noticed nowadays is it fair to say that back then you were less likely to start off in something like Games Workshop or something like that before graduating, if you like, or before moving on to historical? So did more people kick off in historical?
Well, Games Workshop didn't exist.
Because that's, of course, it didn't. It would have been early 80s, but it was very late 80s, wasn't it, Games Workshop?
There was a shop that it was related to, and I can't remember what that was called. Whether that was the White Dwarf or so that was the magazine, wasn't it? But anyway, there was a shop that it was related to, and it was, and I don't know the exact circumstances because I never I've never really done sci-fi stuff or you know, the fantasy gaming, if you like.
Yeah.
And the first I became aware of Games Workshop was in the late 80s. One of the local record stores, big name Virgin Records, had a
Yep.
little game section in there, and they had some of the very early Games Workshop figures
Oh, right. Wow.
in there, and that was the first time I've ever seen them. And
Well, right.
I've had dabbled a couple of times with 40k, and I had the Tetley Space Marines.
Okay.
And I'd painted the Tetley Bitter logo
Brilliant.
on the side of it. Some
Love
of
it.
the
Okay.
stuffy 40k people thought that because it's not a proper chapter and everything. So
Okay.
I never really did anything with it.
and there the story ends.
Yeah,
Because they couldn't handle the Tetley Bitter chapter. Yeah.
yeah, Tetley Bitter Space Marines. I sold them on to somebody. I sold them on to somebody. They're out there somewhere. So if you've got my Tetley Bitter
Wow.
Space Marines and you're listening to this, give me a call.
Oh, this could be our first kind of campaign, Ken.
Find my Tetley
Find
Space
the Tetley Bitter Space Marines. Yeah, I'm going to definitely tweet about that when I'm plugging this podcast. Excellent. Yeah. So what the reason I asked was because what do you think now about how, because this YouTube channel setup is partly aimed at beginners to intermediate and helping people to sort of stick at the hobby once they've got into it as well. Is what do you think? What would your advice be to somebody who's starting out, but because maybe they don't have a club near them or anything like that? And yeah, what I mean, with all due respect to Games Workshop, I think they do a brilliant thing, but it's much easier for people to find Games Workshop, isn't it? Understandably, because they're a huge sort of machine, a well-oiled machine.
Yeah,
what's the best route, do you think? The best way to get started if you
I mean, my
lads,
games. Yeah, my lad's now in his early 20s, and he's trying not to use drug related terms, but his gateway experience, if you like, was Games Workshop. And as he was growing up, we used to make figures together and what have you. So that seems to be the way in now. I think our club, the Leeds club, that I go to on a fairly irregular basis because I get most of my gaming at home. You know, our average age will be late 40s. There's right. Whereas I talked earlier on about how I got into the hobby. I think now most people kind of do a bit of Games Workshop, maybe a bit of D&D when they're younger, possibly at university, and then come back to it in their mid to late 30s. And then, although they're not my cup of tea, they're things like Bolt Action and the bigger games tend to draw people in, and those sort of companies are getting big shops now. And I've noticed a lot of independent gaming shops come up. There's one up in Stirling that I visited Common Ground Games, and they've got a really, really good setup. They've got like a cafe there, they've got a shop.
That's what you
they've
need.
got loads of tables, and that draws people in, and I think it's fantastic. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my sort of frustrations is that I live in the Lead Belt, as it's known, in Nottingham.
You do,
I live where I. Yeah, exactly. I mean, for people who don't know that, who are listening from abroad, or I mean, it took me a while to realise, not being a wargamer before 3 or 4 years ago. You might not necessarily even notice it, but because there is Games Workshop, but then it's only if you Google it that you realise, oh, all of these companies are here, like Warlord and Perry and North Star, Footsaw, the list goes on, Foundry. They're all here, and they're all 10 minutes from my house, kind of thing. Yet we don't really have here. We have board game cafes. There's a place called the Dice Cup in town, stuff like that. But we don't really have a place that's a war games place, that's a tabletop war games, that's more geared towards war games than D&D or just board games, which is a frustration for me because it'd be brilliant to have it here. So you have something like that in Leeds then? So Leeds has something like that. So they're more geared towards war gaming than they are board games.
Yeah, I would say the Leeds War Games Club, the one that I belong to, is probably one of the first generation gaming clubs. There's guys there who are in their mid 70s, probably early 80s now, a couple of them, that were in the sort of Peter Gilder, Donald Featherstone,
Right.
Charles Grant, the original sort of gamer group, and they all knew each other because
Right.
and you'd get a mail shot of a couple of sides of badly copied A4 every
Sure.
2 months.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was all new. So the club has always been very traditional in terms of historical games. But there are other clubs in the Leeds area. There's one that meets near us called the Night Owls,
Mm.
and they tend to do a lot more. Your 40k, your Games Workshop, your
Right. Right.
Malifaux,
Sure.
that sort of stuff. So
Sure.
I think there's clubs out there. It's just a case of finding them,
Yeah,
and
I mean that's
then
what I meant, Ken, was an actual physical space. So like there's a business slash a shop that is a war game shop that hosts historical war games. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
It's like a
no,
historical
yeah,
version of a Games Workshop shop.
yeah, no. There's independents. There's Patriot
Yeah.
Games in Leeds, and there's one in Sheffield. But again, they're more based around your Magic cards and
Right.
your,
Right.
your,
Yeah.
your Games
Yeah.
Workshop stuff. Historical wise, there's a shop in Sheffield called War Games Emporium that does a lot
Okay.
of historical gaming, and they've got a couple of tables in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think gaming wise, if you don't know anyone, I think it's quite difficult. You've got
Yeah.
to scout around and try and find a club or somebody
Yeah.
else who's interested.
Yeah, it took me a while, to be honest, to sort of pluck up the courage and find somebody who had the space, because a lot of sort of groups, if you like, they've only got so much space for so many members on such a night, depending on what the spaces they have, unless they've got a massive village hall or something. And B, to sort of find somewhere near me, because that was the thing I found surprising, is the bit of Nottinghamshire that I live in, despite being in the middle of Leadbelt, there isn't a group in my town, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there isn't one within. I'd have to go all the way into the city, basically. So I ended up going to Mansfield, which is it's 25-minute, half an hour drive each way, but it's worth it. It's well worth it once I finally got there. But I suppose that's one of the things I did notice, is it's a fantastic hobby, but it's actually harder to get into socially than you think it is if you don't know anyone already, if you know what I mean, if you don't know a friend of a friend.
Yeah. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of little groups that nobody really knows about throughout the country, who, like the Yorkshire Gamer crew, who meet at my house.
Yeah.
And with the best will in the world, I can't invite everyone into my house.
Exactly.
It's not very big enough, and my German Shepherd would probably eat a couple of them.
Yeah, I'm sure there were 6 of us when we started. Yeah.
Oh, the dog's got a shoe in its mouth. Where did that come
from? Yeah. So I think the other thing I was going to ask you was, so what I was getting to was, what would your advice be to somebody who wants to they want to have a go at it? What would you tell them to do first? Would you tell them to go to a group first, or just to buy something first? And what would you tell them to buy?
I think we're in a good situation in terms of having a lot of good stuff on the internet. So the stuff that you're doing at the moment, the introductory stuff is great, and that's the sort of thing. If you type into YouTube, starting wargaming or something similar, something will come up. And even for me at my age, I've started a new set of ancient rules called Mortem and Glorium.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, I was looking around. I've been looking around for a decent set of ancient rules for a long, long time, and this came up. I thought, all right, typed it into YouTube. There's loads of instructional videos on there, so I knew how to play it before I bought the rules. So what I'm kind of saying to people is that if you've got an interest, if you type in what you're interested in, the resources are out there. It might take you a little bit of time to work your way around it and find the right stuff. There's a YouTube channel called Little Wars TV, an American one.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
quite good. They're very good at their presenting and the way that they do stuff. And then you're trying to find somebody who other gamers, if you like, and your games workshop's one way, your cafe gaming is another one, and then finding, if you can, a local club, and meeting the right people. That's often
sure,
the key.
sure,
That's often the key. My
sure.
best friends are the guys that I started gaming with when I went to university 30 years ago.
Wow, yeah.
And it's kind of a friendship for life thing now.
Yeah, and I bet the fun you've had with them and the stuff you've done as a group over those years is something to remember as well, isn't it? I suppose
Yeah,
the stuff you achieved as a
exactly.
group. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So before we get into some slightly more technical stuff, then I want to ask you, and the sort of the slightly more controversial stuff, if there is such a thing. Is there? Yeah, exactly. Is there a project then that you're most proud of that you look at? You know what, that was really bloody good, and that you think you're, because I mean, everybody looks back on stuff, don't they, and think, yeah, that was good, but I wish I'd done such and such differently now. Is there anything? What are you most proud of out of all of that stuff? Can you pick one army, one thing?
It would be an absolute dead heat between two. It would be the Italian Wars Army that we spoke about earlier on, the 28 mil Italian Wars Army, and that the interest in the blog in general that brought in, and it won a prize in the Analog Hobbies Paint Challenge for the best entry that year.
I saw that. Yeah, I think I saw.
Yeah, and it was really, really good, and I still generate a lot of inquiries about that army even today. It was that one, and then the other one is the Project Jutland that we did. That I say I did. And we recreated the Battle of Jutland, all 250 ships in 1:2400 scale, which is GHQ ships, and they're not cheap. No. And we put that game on again. That one got a lot of interest, and World War One naval does not get a lot of interest at all. Trust me.
No, World War One generally doesn't, does it? Really, not really.
No.
Yeah.
And we went to we showed that at the Royal Armouries. We had interest from the Royal Naval Museum. I did a podcast with some guys in the States who are big into, run a big naval game site over there. So that was probably the other one. Those two are the biggest ones, and probably the ones I'm most proud of. When I lay them out on the table, I go, yeah, they're all right then.
Yeah. It's satisfying, that, isn't it? When there are a few sins. Do you know what I mean? Like, I would, a lot of my old stuff, I look back at it and I go, there's a few sins in there that I made, sort of committed sinful things. Yeah. when there's stuff in front of you, and you think, yeah, that's fine. That's a win, isn't it? Yeah.
There's always somebody on a internet forum somewhere that will try and pick a hole in something, but just ignore them.
Yeah. I've only ever had that once.
Oh, you lucky man.
Yeah, they were quite rude as well. They were fairly rude about it. It's the first time I've ever had anybody once be negative in any way. And actually, I'm okay with people saying, that's all right, but what I would have done would have been this. I'm happy for people to say that, but this person was really quite rude. They said, you've made this mistake and you've made it many times. And that was it.
Well, we had a guy from the States who stalked us for a couple of years, and his issue was that we had palm trees in desert games. And yeah, exactly.
That was his hill to die on, was it? The palm trees.
So this guy's sending me all these pictures of like northern Tunisia and all these places, and so we did a game that I put up on the blog, and it was a fight for an Italian fort in early World War II, and he was back again, bless him. You've got palm trees in the desert again. So I actually had prepared. It's like an ambush, if you like. I'd prepared and had a photograph of the fort on the day of the attack with palm trees outside. So I sent
Brilliant.
him that, and his response was, "There are 5 palm trees in the photograph. You have 6 on your table."
And his true
So,
motivation is revealed, which is purely to wind you up.
so from that moment on, and we've stopped doing it the last couple of years, but we actually had the palm tree in every single game that we played. So the eagle-eyed amongst you, looking through the older Yorkshire Gamer
I was going to say that.
report,
Just get
will
one in.
find
Yeah.
we'll find palm trees in American War of Independence, in the Napoleonic era. They're there somewhere.
Just for that one man.
Just
Amazing.
for that one guy. He's
Amazing.
probably got my Tetley bit of Space Marines as well.
It's probably him that bought them. Oh, imagine if I put the appeal out and he comes back.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Right. So that was sort of part one, if you like. So
Okay.
that part two, it's the second act of this 2-act podcast,
Yeah.
I suppose, is the sort of slightly more technical stuff for the more knowledgeable people out there.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I've noticed is you are one of these incredibly rare, brave creatures that uses oil paint. Can you,
Yes.
in some models, don't you, in some particular ways? Do you want to just explain like the main way in which you use oil paint for people who don't know?
Yeah. I have to. It's a technique that's been going on since wargaming started, and it's a method of painting horses. I only use oil paints on horses,
Right.
And I've done a YouTube video of it. It's quite long. It's about 40 odd minutes or so, which is a lot more than most people's attention span, unfortunately. But I go through absolutely everything. If you're going to have a go at painting horses with oils, then that's the one to look at. But basically, all it is a method of painting horses that is really quick. So you'll prime your horses in white primer, and then paint a colour onto them that is the highlight, if you like, of the colour of the horse that you're going to paint. So rather than normal, you'll put darker colours and build light on top. In this case, what you do is you put your lightest coat on and you absolutely slap it all over. If you look at the video, I'm probably not even looking at the horse. I'm just covering it in paint, and you can do it with an airbrush as well. That's another way of doing it. But I struggle with an airbrush because of the changing and cleaning every time you change a colour. But so anyway, you end up basically with this horse that's a dry acrylic, light brown or yellow ochre or brown ochre, green ochre, or whatever you've used as your base colour, and then you put a darker colour of oil paint over the top. And again, we're not doing masterclass in terms of detail. We're just slapping it all on, and it's covered completely in oil paint. And then you just grab household toilet tissue and wipe it across the surface of the horse. And what that does is it removes the excess oil paint, revealing the lighter colour underneath. Because of the way that the oil paint works, it slightly dyes the colour underneath, so it blends into the darker colour. And it's fantastic. I've been doing it for years and years and years, and I don't know why everyone else doesn't do it. There's a lot of horror stories out there about the amount of time it takes to dry. And that used to be, people used to do the base coating oils as well, which used to take forever. But a couple of days, and they're ready to start putting acrylic paint over the top for, your reins and your horse furniture and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And I will do batches of 60 to 100 horses at a time with that oil paint method, and I just leave them. There's boxes lying around this house, half painted horses in everywhere, and I just pick them up and they're dry, and we're up and running,
and they're ready to go. Yeah, you got a horse. One of the notoriously sort of slightly more difficult and taxing things if you're building a large army, your cavalry is half done. So
a lot of people spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours shading a horse. And
like me.
And going back to the tips, we're talking earlier about for newer people starting it. A lot of people can get obsessed on getting one figure exactly right.
Yeah.
And if if you look if you look closely at my stuff, you'll see mistakes, and I can see mistakes. But I look at it and go, I've got a mistake. I've got a mistake on 3 figures in a 500-man army,
Right.
rather than having 5 perfect figures.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the way I've always looked at it. Not to get hung up on, going
Yeah.
back over and over figures and making sure they're 100% correct.
Do you know what? That's a brilliant piece of advice, because that's what I didn't do when I started. When I started, my goal was, I'm going to paint. What I want to do is I want to get to a point where every figure I paint is like 5-star, and it's not practical for a beginner at all. What I should have done is I should have just thought, tabletop batch paint, learn how to do that competently, get good at that, and then worry about getting better. And I did it the wrong way around, basically.
Yeah. And when you paint to a decent standard, and you've got a unit all in that standard, it looks fantastic. Whereas if you've got 20 Golden Demon winners all in a unit, and you're looking at it from 3 feet away, you can't tell the difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I've got this thing now where I've got this unit of Burgundians that I painted, I don't know, a few months ago, and they're good. It's like they're a million times better than the stuff I painted 4 years ago, but they're not what I normally paint. so they're sat next to stuff that is bang average at best. And it does look a little, And now I think I wish I'd just found a better bang average. Do you know what I mean? And left the really good stuff for characters.
You will build up to that, and I look at my style has changed subtly over the years, and I've changed the use of washes and inks and shading just gradually over time, and tried different things out, and stuff I've liked I've kept, and sometimes I've gone back to stuff, and you just developing your own style. Stuff I look at from 5 years ago, maybe I could do a bit more on that, but I think no, I'll crack on and do some more stuff and develop the style that way.
Sure. And just out of interest, because I'm a bit of a paint freak in that I do like buying paints and playing around with different paints, even if they achieve largely the same effect in the end because of my style. I do like doing that. I mean, do you find that, do you have like in your paint collection or whatever, is there a spine in that's the same brand, or is there a particular brand that you like or do you just have loads?
No, I've changed over the years, and I started painting with enamels, and there's still a few people who do that. But I've moved on to acrylics, and Vallejo is my go-to range now. And I would say that 90% of my stuff comes from them. Then specialist-wise, AK Interactive are because the Counter scheme that I've done on the World War II desert stuff, that's all from AK on Interactive, and they do really good sets for like rusting, some pieces like that.
I've seen they've got like a really good weathering stuff, haven't they?
Yeah, they are perfect for that. And then around that, I've got stuff that I've had for years that I've just not been able to better. So there's a Games Workshop paint called Mithril Silver that will now. I don't know why the Games Workshop, they did it with the washes. They had a fantastic washes range, and then they just changed them all.
Well, I know why they do it.
Devlin Mud, that was it. Devlin Mud was the wash. It was a bit like Army Painter Strong Tone.
Now, did that not? No, I've got some Devlin Mud, which somebody else gave me because it's older, isn't it?
Well, that's worth a fortune. That's worth a fortune.
I've got that, and I've also got Agrax Earthshade, and Devlin Mud and Agrax Earthshade. Like Agrax Earthshade is kind of like the sort of utility version of Devlin Mud, I think. Oh, we're getting really technical now, but some people heard this conversation now. Yeah. Anyway, but I think that it kind of graduated into Agrax. I think Devlin Mud. I think they realised its value. Do you know what I mean? And they turned it into Agrax. Yeah,
but I always found that the Agrax Earthshade was not quite as hard to explain, but the Devlin Mud is more vibrant, and it had like a sheen to it.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Slightly
Absolutely.
more orangey, maybe. Devlinman's got that
Yeah,
a
yeah,
bit warmer, maybe. And
yeah.
like
That's a
Agrax is a
warm. That's it.
bit blacker,
Yeah,
a bit darker,
yeah.
bit muckier.
Warm is the adjective. Perfect adjective. Warm.
Yeah,
I like.
yeah. We'll get into colour palette now, aren't we? And all that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah. What was I going to say? So, having said that, and this is I hate doing this to people, but I think it's true. Do
Hmm.
you find yourself, if you had to choose, would you say you're more of a collector painter or more of a gamer?
There's been times through the years when I would quite happily sit in one rather than the other.
Mm,
But I would say I'm primarily a collector painter,
right.
and I'm just very fortunate in that at the moment I'm gaming quite regularly with the crew here and have been for 6 or 7 years at the house. But I could probably, although I'm itching a bit now with the lockdown, we've not gamed here since March.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
sorry, yeah, March, April it was.
yeah, yeah,
And we're looking to try. We're having another go in a couple of weeks' time.
yeah,
And I've missed it, but I've continued to paint all the way through.
yeah,
And I don't think I would stop painting. I could stop gaming. I wouldn't be brilliant, I wouldn't love it, but could stop gaming. But I would struggle to stop painting because I find it. It's my, everyone has a relaxing thing that they do to get rid of the
yeah,
stresses of the day, and
yeah, yeah.
painting is that for me.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that sort of leads on to the next question. Why do you think you do it? I mean, whether it's the whole, and I mean the hobby generally, because I have this thing, this conversation a lot, being a bit younger, and and obviously I don't know many people at all who even know what it is.
Yeah,
So I have to
no,
explain,
it's
and
true.
I'm sure you've had the same conversation. It's a bit like, so is it a board game? It's like, no, it's not a board game. And so do you just sort of play with it? No, not really. Well, we do, but it's a game. And well, how's it? And then, you must have had that conversation before. And then
Yeah,
that conversation. What do you? How do you paint them? Do you have a big magnifying glass? No, no. It's So that sort of conversation. So what? Which causes me to sort of reflect and try and explain to them like what I get out of it, because sometimes I'm not really sure why I do it, because particularly when I'm like bending over on my garage floor, painting a bit of flooring. What am I doing? So what do you get out of it? What motivates you to do it? What do you get out of it?
oh, so many different things. I suppose it changes over time. So now my number one thing would be friendship. I would say,
Mm,
the guys I've gamed with for so many years and are such good friends that
mm,
that's the primary driver for it now. It's meeting up with friends who've got a likewise interest.
mm,
But when I started, that wasn't it because I didn't know those people. But it would then it's for me it's a love of history. I've always
mm,
been a
mm.
massive history buff, and I've dragged my wife and kids around the battlefields of Europe on many a
They
holiday.
weren't dragged. They went willingly, as much as they were trying.
But to be honest, my wife can recognise the vast majority of tank types of World War II.
And that's a good thing.
Following, yeah, we had a holiday in the Normandy beaches for a fortnight, and then we had another holiday up in the Battle of the Bulge area.
Yeah, yeah,
So she is absolutely spot on when I spy tank. She's
yeah.
very, very good. So yeah,
Excellent.
the historical aspect, the friendship aspect, um, the and then the as I spoke to a little bit about a second ago about the painting aspect is a
Yeah,
relaxation for me. People read or play a musical instrument or go for hikes in the dales or whatever. I know I can just switch off from everyday grind just
mm,
by sitting at a table and painting and having a podcast or whatever on in the background and awesome music and just
yeah.
whiling the hours away painting some stuff.
Yeah, that's funny you said that, because that's what I say to everybody who's like, "What? That's that looks like a lot of patience." And I was like, "Is that not
Yeah,
annoying? Is it not annoying to do?" And I'm like, "No, it's actually the most relaxing thing I do in my life."
yeah. I
And
mean,
it's surprising, isn't
I've
it?
got yeah, I've got friends who go fishing, and I cannot see the point, especially when you're not eating the fish that you catch. I can see I
Yeah.
can see an end game there. I can see, right, I'm going to come home. I'm going to have some lovely fish and chips. But if you're catching the fish and you're putting them back in the water and you're measuring what you've caught, etc. And for those people who go and do that, then that's their relaxation, isn't it? They're in the
Mm.
beautiful countryside, miles from anywhere. A couple of tins of Stella cooling in the canal, and you know they don't have to worry about life for a couple of hours. So for me, gaming and painting and collecting figures is just that's my version of fishing, if you like.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, looking at how long you've been cracking on it as well, and the volume there, the numbers we talked about. I mean, I've got two young kids. I've got a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old,
Mm.
and I work full time too. And I do find that getting up any kind of numbers quickly is a challenge. How do you sort of like balance it? What's your sort of time management type tips, if you like? How do you crack on?
It's I mean, over the years I've worked shifts, which is fantastic because quite
Right. Yeah.
often there's only me in the house and the kids might be at school and the wife might be at work, and this time there's always me time. And or I might finish work at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and come home and not be tired and have 2 or 3 hours. So those days are over now. I work mostly days, but
Mm.
the kids have grown up and gone. So
Right.
there's more time for me. And with you having young kids, you'll be going through one of those cycles where it's difficult to get time to do it.
Mm.
And one of the things I find, and it's a very, very basic, straightforward methodology, is I just try and make a tiny bit of time each day to do a tiny bit of hobby.
Yeah.
So it might
Yeah.
just be one of the things I tend to do at the moment is I'll do a colour on a set of figures. So
Right.
I might be painting at the moment. I am painting some World War One
Yep.
Arab cavalry for like Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah.
So I might go, right, I'm just going to paint the hooves black.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll do that, and it'll be 5 minutes, and then that'll be. I won't do anything else for the day. But
Yeah.
then it just keeps you ticking over.
Yeah. But you've conquered a
And
percentage. Yeah. Yeah.
and then by the time you've worked your Monday to Friday or your 4 days on or whatever you do, then you come to the weekend or your days off, and you then I've cracked on with these a bit. And then you've got the enthusiasm to do a bit more when you've got more spare time. So that's what I try and do, just a tiny little bit each day, just to keep units moving rather than sat there looking exactly the same every day.
Yeah, interesting. I don't want to bang on about it for ages, but something I've done recently is I used to do that. So up until recently, if I had 25 Wars of Roses to paint and they were Yorkists, I'd do the red and the livery on all 25. Then I'd do the blue on all 25, and then do the metals. What I mean? I'd do it like that. Recently, I started to paint one figure at a time, like from head to toe. So I'll start. I'll paint probably 5-6 nights a week, probably for an hour, maybe a little bit longer. And I'll paint, and I'll end up doing 2 or 3 in that hour. And the benefit to that is you might think you do less doing that, but actually, I find I can concentrate more and crack more out because by the end of the night, I've got 3 completed figures that are finished. Right, they need basing, but they're done, and I can look at it and go, Whereas when I'm doing 25 and I'm just done 25 sets of boots or whatever, they just sort of look the same in the beginning. Do you know what I mean? So I found that useful actually, just changing the tack slightly.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that you need to do is develop your own methodology and your own style. I will paint. I paint in batches of 6 to 8. Right. So if I've got a unit, the unit I'm doing at the moment is quite small, so it's 12 figures. So I'm just doing them in batches of 6, and I'll paint the horses, and while put the horses on the bases, and while I'm doing bits and pieces on the figures, I can be putting the plaster on the bases and painting the bases and doing the bits and pieces. So I'll do them in batches of 6. And other stuff I'll do in batches of 8 and just build it up that way. Right. I think, like you said earlier on, if you're trying to do 24 figures all at the same time, or just doing the boots,
Yeah.
you're going to go stir crazy. You like to have an end product, and whether that's 2 or 3 finished figures in a night, or
Yeah.
half of 8 finished figures, if you like. When
It's a
I
target. It's a point,
yeah,
isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, I'm in the games room at the moment, and I'm just looking at some command stands I've done for my Crusades army, and all those were painted individually, which is very rare for me. But it's like an individual command stand with 2 figures, a standard bearer and a commander on horseback. And I've painted those 2 figures purely together, which is quite rare. But for
Wow.
a command stand, you're focusing on that one base, if you like.
Sure. Yeah.
Whereas when you're doing a unit, you're trying to get, I don't know, 24, 32 or whatever it is, figures all done relatively the same.
Right. Interesting. I've got a theory actually. Just going back to what that principle of sitting down and painting this physical sort of little thing combined with all the reading of history books. Because a lot of, I don't know about you, but a lot of the reading I do, all right, I might do, if I'm thinking about a battle, I might get on a Wikipedia page for it. But if I'm really building up to a project, inevitably a lot of the research ends up being out of books, not off screen, if you like, so that you order, because you can't get the level of detail that you need really, and see from the internet per se. So I've got a theory actually that particularly for maybe my generation, people in their 40s, that the hobby is almost become an unintentional antidote to the technological age, if you like. Because although I say that ironically, because here we are, 2 people who've both got, YouTube channels and Twitter and all that sort of stuff. But I actually think that that's something that might be helping the hobby a little bit and is pushing some people towards it, because it's so different to, I don't know, computer gaming or all of the other stuff which you do in your life, which involves a screen, basically.
I'd agree with that. There was a documentary on BBC4, and I think it's still running at the moment, called Games Britannia. And one of the things they were talking on there about, they even covered wargaming for about 3 minutes, which was quite impressive. And one of the things they were talking about on there was the current boom in board gaming and card gaming. I know there's a club up near me in one of the towns called Keighley, which is it's not a tiny town, but it's a small town in Yorkshire, and that's got a massive board game club. And I've got friends who board games for years, and they go around to each other's houses and board games like a social activity, who've never heard of wargaming. So the board game thing is that reaction, if you like. It's that, let's get away from technology for a while and just sit around the table.
It is like that. I've never thought board gaming like that, but it is similar, isn't it? That's why there's a revival of it, isn't there? Because people don't want to do literally everything in their life on a screen. Yeah, so that's certainly something that I find useful, because my normal life does involve screens a lot, particularly my job and stuff. So and I know I'm sat in front of a screen right now, but when I'm actually hobbying, it's a nice So I've got some sort of what have I got here? Oh, no, sorry, I thought I had a horrible technological warning that was going to shut down the computer. But good. Anyway, just moving on slightly to last few things. So, is there a part of you that thinks that we spoke about it before we started recording, that thinks there's actually too much choice? Because that's something that I noticed when I started, is that there is nearly every single period covered now. There is too many rule sets to count. There is a crazy amount of paint manufacturers, and there are lots and lots of blogs, many of which are really helpful. But do you think that, having started from that library section, if you like, do you think that we reached a point where the level of choice is not helpful? Because I know some people who think that.
Yeah, it can be a difficulty. It's a curse and a blessing at the same time. If you want to look for something, you can find it, and whether it's everyday life or politics or whatever, you can find somebody who agrees with your point of view. And sometimes that isn't particularly helpful, because you're not having a discussion on the actual thing that you're talking about. So you can I mean, I've not ventured that much into the Games Workshop sort of social media world, but I can imagine that's quite a scary place. Uh,
Yeah.
but I've certainly found from a gaming experience that the vast majority of people are in the gaming world are quite friendly, they're quite helpful. There's
Definitely.
a lot of people on the internet, and I'd like to try and include myself in that. Who when people contact them and say, "Oh, how do I do this?" or
They'll
"What
just tell you.
what do you
Yeah.
use for that?" I'm quite happy to just spend 30 seconds of my time just sending a message or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
because there's no financial interest from my side of things.
Yeah.
I'm not a business. I mean, occasionally people have thought, "Oh, Yorkshire Gamer, you're only plugging this because you're getting free stuff or you're getting percentages off," and I don't.
Yeah.
It's just me telling you my
Yeah. Yeah.
ideas, if you like. So, if you're just starting out, it can be a massive minefield. It can be a massive minefield, but you will find that, as I did when I was looking to start my Italian Wars army, for example, I found a blog that was from a guy called Robbie Rodist, and he was starting Wargaming the Borgias is his
Wow.
website. He's not put anything on there for 2 or 3 years,
Mm.
but he goes through building up his army for the Borgias in the 1490s,
Yep.
and that was my inspiration. And if
Yeah.
you've got something specific that you want to do, you search around on the internet. You might have to get through some rubbish and some bits and pieces that aren't particularly helpful, but there is a nugget out there somewhere for everyone,
Yeah.
that will help them and guide them
Yeah.
quite specifically towards
Yeah.
an army or a period.
Yeah, I sort of add to that actually because when I started out, I think possibly because it's a niche hobby kind of thing, and it is definitely a niche hobby. I think we can agree
Oh,
on that kind of thing. Is that I had this perception when I started on Twitter and things that that people would not be unfriendly, but they would be a bit cliquey or a little bit looked down on people who didn't know anything, or they would be unwilling to help if they were very knowledgeable, kind of thing. That they would kind of protect their knowledge, kind of thing. And I found the exact opposite to be true. So if you're listening to this and you're new, and you see somebody who's painted something really well, or they've done something that you want to find out more about, just ask them. Because I found that
Yeah,
99 times out of 100, they'll just reply to you. Yeah, definitely.
yeah, I would very much agree with that. There was when I started, there was kind of two streams of gaming, if you like. There was the competition gamers, and they were mostly ancient players, and they would sit in the corner, smoking the pipe, drinking half a pint of mild.
Oh yeah,
I'm
that's
stereotyping
me
there.
in 20 years, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, arguing about Grieve armor on a Marian Roman legionary or something like that, and they were quite non-approachable, I would suggest. They
Okay.
were sort of grumpy history professor types, if you like.
Right.
So the people, the gamers, the older gamers, who are on Facebook and are on Twitter and Instagram and wherever, tend to be the more outgoing types, the ones that are prepared to talk. So I certainly wouldn't be, upset if anyone contacts me as a result of this. I've had four or
Yeah.
five people get in contact with me today about the World War II army, and I've quite
Yeah.
happily shared experiences and ideas for them to help build their army. So
Yeah.
it's no drama at all.
Yeah. I mean, that's I can end up. I can see myself ending up in time as I get a bit more experience as becoming a bit of an evangelist type thing, because any time people come around my house and they're like, and because I don't necessarily tell people I know immediately because just doesn't come up in conversation. It just doesn't. Why would it ever come up in conversation? But if it does, or if they see the stuff out on the table or whatever, because I don't hide it away, they'll be like, "Oh, what's that?" And then the slightest flicker of interest, and I'm like, "Oh, the paints are only this much, and I can show you what to buy." And yeah, it's trying to suck people in, sort of thing.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the way forward. That's the only way the hobby will survive.
Yeah, totally. And off the back of that, then, I mean, where do you see the hobby going? I mean, you've seen it from almost its inception, or you've seen it from its very, you've seen the very early growth of what we have now. So, do you think we're in a good place at the minute? Is everything healthy and in the right direction? And we know we spoke about choice and things, but
yeah, I think we are. I think there's a dark cloud on the horizon, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I think at the moment, as we stand at the moment, we're in a fantastic position. We've got a great number of figure manufacturers. It's easy to find, pictures of their stuff. Years ago, you would see an advert for a company, and you'd have to send off and buy some to find out what they look like. Or you would go to one of the 4 war game shows a year or whatever it was at the time. So we're very lucky in that, and we've got some fantastic sculptors out there. We've the likes of Paul Hicks, who does the Empress Miniatures stuff. His work's fantastic.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
And I don't know who's done the I can't remember the company name, but there's a Baron's War medieval.
Is this the Kickstarter?
Yeah,
they're lovely. They're really nice.
I'd love to know who did those.
Yeah, I can't remember that. Are they not? Are they a Footsore offshoot? Or am I wrong about that?
Could be Footsore. They're really nice figures as well. There's lots of nice stuff out there. We're getting international companies because it's quite UK centric, the hobby. There's a few, there's places in the States that do stuff, but there's these European manufacturers, people like Fireforge, who all my Crusader figures are from Italy. There's a wonderful company in Russia called Avonpost who do 28mm Napoleonics, and they are absolutely gorgeous. So we're at a fantastic place at the moment, I think, and we seem to be at a stage where we've got more people involved. You go to a war game show when they were still open prior to COVID, and attendances were starting to go up again from a dip maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So it all very, very positive. The dark cloud of which I speak is 3D printing.
Okay.
And I'm yet to see how that will work as a business model for most of our established war games figures manufacturers.
Right.
Right. As we, if I'm big into our music, and a lot of bands these days who would survive off sales of their CDs and records 10, 15 years ago, they just haven't got that income anymore because Spotify and the like has spent, giving them a zillionth of a penny for each play. So where does figure manufacturing money come from in a world of 3D printing?
I mean,
and that 3D printing is getting better and better over time. One of the lads who games here regularly, Andy, he's big into that sort of technology stuff, and he brings stuff he's 3D printed along. And when it first started, it was like, it's not really very good, that is it? And then the slab side of stuff like tanks and vehicles started to get better and better, and he did a 10mm sort of Korean stuff that he printed. Fantastic, stuff that you would readily buy from a figure manufacturer. And once you paid out for the printer, which could be 300-400 quid, the actual materials to print are virtually nothing. Right. So I don't know where it's. I haven't got a company, but I don't. If I had a war games figures company, I would be scratching my head about how I'm going to compete with that.
Interesting. I think my understanding of that is, having spoken to a few people in the industry, is that the barriers at the minute with 3D printing, the reason you or I don't do it is actually in the time. So at the minute, to 3D print, the amount of maintenance of the equipment, and there's lots of cleaning of slates to do, and managing of the resins and things like that. And my understanding is in many cases it creates an awful smell, and you got to clear stuff up. And actually, it does take many hours to print something. Then you got to clean it up a lot after that, and you got to clean it up way more than you got to clean up a plastic miniature. And then it's got to cure, and then it looks brilliant. but that has taken a long time. So I think the sort of feeling at the minute, it's a little bit like electric cars 5 years ago, in that they're brilliant,
Yeah.
but they only go so far and there's too much baggage. So are you saying that if those problems get cleaned up, then we've got a problem, or we've got a dilemma if you're a manufacturer?
Well, it's going to need a different business model for for people to produce the models. The more and more models coming out in plastics now, than as opposed to metal, which again, pluses and minuses of that. It's great to be able to buy cheap stuff to fill an army out, and get big armies on the table quite relatively cheaply. But then the cost of making a plastic sprue is extortionate, I believe. So you're looking at scales of economy. You're looking at pumping out thousands of these things. So your Crusader command stands that I've just been talking about, you're not going to be able to produce those as plastic figures. They're always going to have to be metal because you're not going to sell that many of them.
It's still enough. Yeah.
So the improvement I've seen in it. We had to. There was one ship that we couldn't get for Project Jutland, a ship called HMS Engadine, which was one of the first ever aircraft carriers. And at the time, nobody made it. So Andy, bless him, bought a 3D printer to print the ship.
Yeah.
And that's looking at it now. It's really basic compared to stuff that we've got now 4 years on. So where are we going to be in another 4 years?
In another 4 years, yeah. I was just thinking that no doubt we will look back on this conversation in, say, 10 years and be like, a bit like the conversations that people had about the iPhone and stuff like that, isn't it?
Because the thing that we spoke about many years ago was in the 80s, when computer games were becoming quite common, would be that they would be replaced by computer games, and you would have soldiers marching on the screen, and that's arrived now. If you look at the things like Rome Total War and those sorts of games, that is wargaming on the screen, but it's not the physical thing of having the troops in your hand.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of it, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm not suggesting that the hobby's just about to disappear or put its own windpipe, but I think it is something that will become an issue financially for figure manufacturers, and they're going to have to look at in terms of bringing new ranges out and stuff.
Sure. I mean, I suppose the one thing you can say is that if that created problems for manufacturers, that from a consumer point of view, there'll still be war games. You'll just print the stuff yourself, I suppose. I mean, if I was a manufacturer, I would be thinking, we'll keep doing what we're doing, but by God, let's get some thought into what we would do to maybe sort of copyright and get really good at digital sculpts. So we become brilliant at digital sculpts. So you can send a sort of watermarked, I don't know what it's called, but you can send a watermarked download template or whatever, to a person. show how little I know about the subject. So to a person who can then keep that, but then they can't move it on anywhere else, and something like that. Maybe, I don't know. But that's where I'd be putting. I would definitely be doing that if I was GW or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Couple of last questions then. So quick fire ish. Although they're quite deep questions. So as a beginner, when I first went to a wargame show, I was like, this is brilliant. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Everyone was really friendly. The stuff on sale looked great. The manufacturers were brilliant. The games on display were like nothing I'd ever seen. It inspired the hell out of me. And those are the things. Those are the first things I noticed. The second thing I noticed was that everyone in the room, out of 800 people, were largely older than me. So they were above 40. They were largely men, and they were largely white. And I'm not saying that any of that's bad. I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all, and that the hobby should change. But I did think this is different to if you go somewhere like board games, where the group is the people who are into it is a bit more mixed. It's a little bit more like a family sort of environment, if you like, to it. whereas a wargaming convention doesn't feel to me like a family event. And I'm not saying that I didn't quite enjoy that because it's nice to go to a wargaming event and not have the two kids with me. And my 3-year-old would not mix in a wargaming event. That would be that would be bad. But should wargaming care that it's a very narrow demographic? Is it being held back by that?
It's an interesting one to think about. I mean, I've been through Leeds Wargames Club. I've been involved in the organisation of shows, and we're the Leeds show Fiasco runs every year.
And I heard of that. Yeah.
Although I'm not particularly involved in it anymore. I was to a large extent about 10 years ago, and I suppose then we didn't really think about it.
Yeah.
And you occasionally get ladies through, families through. We always used to let dad would pay and wife and kids would come in for nothing. That was one thing that we did. But it never really, turned into an avalanche of things.
Right.
And then it's very difficult to plan for. If you plan something for the kids and then no kids show up,
then you wasted your time. Yeah,
you wasted your time. Yeah, and it's something that I'm sure will filter through as society changes. I'm sure it will.
Yeah,
it will change. I was a middle class schoolboy in a suburban area, and we went to a semi posh school, and history and stuff like that, and gaming was part of the curriculum. And that was the set that I moved in. I don't think there's any boundaries for people being involved. One of the people who are in the paint challenge every year, Tamsin Piper down in London. She's a female gamer. I think a War Games blog's called, and it doesn't make any difference to me.
No, I'm not
complaining. Yeah,
no, not at all.
About palm trees, then
no, of course. I mean, they're the people who are not welcome. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm not suggesting that it does matter to you. That's not what I was trying to get at. It's just something I thought. I mean, I think that I probably will rub people up by saying that I think that in an ideal world, literally everyone would be into it. So the 5-year-olds, the 10-year-olds. Everybody from the family would be into it to a certain degree. Do you know what I mean? In an ideal world, that's my ideal world. Why do I say that? Because I just think the more people are doing it, the better it will get. Because manufacturers will get more competitive. Because there'll be even more stuff to do. Things will be a bit more focused. I think it'll be easier to get into the hobby, and that's got to be a good thing, I think. And I'm not saying I've got the answers at all, and I can understand why people see it as a grown-up hobby. Do you know what I mean? But yeah.
It's a case of exposure, isn't it? And a case of people seeing it and becoming involved in it. And if it's not moving in, if it's only moving in some circles and not in others, and people just aren't aware of it, then you're just not going to get people taking it up if they're not, if they don't know anything about the hobby. And maybe just seeing it from outside, a lot of people can be put off by the militaristic side to it. That can put people off. So. We're in a healthy thing, and like I say, everyone is welcome.
Yeah, totally. I found that as well. I think there's a perception, isn't there, that it's maybe for one type of person, but it's not. Yeah, I discovered that you will be welcome. I think the other thing I've noticed is that you're just going on to the militaristic thing. I think you're right that people think you could misinterpret it as some kind of celebration of war or something like that. But I've never seen it like that. I've seen it as a celebration of history, and I find it, if anything, in some cases, it can be a demonstration of the less glamorous side of war, because it highlights in some certain scenarios and some of the problems you come across and the history you read. Definitely doesn't gloss over or glorify it. You know what I mean? It doesn't hide away from it.
You have a better awareness of it and a historical perspective to what was going on at what particular time. And it's one of those things where somebody will be playing somebody's enemy in some game or other, whether it's the Germans or the Japanese or the Christians or whatever, subsect of a religion that you're playing, it will be fighting against somebody, and there's a potential to upset somebody there. I don't think it's deliberate. I think that it's everyone I've ever met, it's a genuine interest in the history, and if at the end of the day the leaders of the countries sorted their problems out with toy soldiers on tables,
totally.
Surely that's a better idea.
What a brilliant point. That is exactly what we should do.
Exactly.
That is exactly what should happen. Yeah, very good point. Very good point. Yeah. Do you have a last question then? Do you have we've spoken a lot about like all of your achievements and stuff you've done in the blog and stuff. Do you have a painter or a gamer that inspires you, that you sort of look up to and think, oh my god, their collection's like even more impressive than mine, and their painting's brilliant? And is there a particular person that you think, wow, they are super talented and that inspires you?
There's some really, really good painters out there, and it's sometimes it's like horses for courses as well on some occasions. There's a guy called Sacha Hearn.
Oh yeah,
It tends to do larger figures. His painting is absolutely exquisite, absolutely exquisite. But he will tend to do one-offs rather than armies.
Yeah.
So I love his stuff. Mark Allen, I really like his stuff as well.
Not heard of him.
Kevin Dallimore.
Kevin Dallimore. Yeah, he does a lot of stuff Foundry, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, he does stuff, a lot of stuff for Foundry. They're kind of like your classic painters, if you like.
Yeah.
And then people will inspire me with projects that they're doing. So we spoke earlier about Robbie and his Borges website. There's another guy called Mark Hargreaves who's Open Sites website. Okay. He does World War One Far East, which is what I'm big into that as well. So when I was starting that collection, I was kind of following and looking what he was doing in terms of ideas and what have you. So I tend to latch on to people who are doing a project that I'm interested in, and hopefully people do that with the stuff that I do as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And look into it and see what figures they get in, and if they're doing little conversions, or they might come across a figure manufacturer I haven't heard of, and highlight their figures or a set of rules. It's just being guided, if you like, by somebody who's going through the same process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Ken, that's been really interesting. I really enjoyed that. I hope other people who listen to it have too. Thanks very much for your time. We've done our first interview with Masters interviews. We've done it. We've survived. Yeah. I've got to at least get up to sort of like 50 or whatever now, haven't I? So yeah, you always. Yeah.
Always do the first one.
Yeah, we've done an hour and a half, and we're not arguing or bored. So. So we've done all right, yeah. So if you've not seen all of Ken's channels yet, check them out. There's the Yorkshire Gamer blog. There's the YouTube. He's got a Facebook page. You're on Instagram as well, aren't you? Yeah, you're definitely on
Instagram as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and Twitter. Check it all out. Follow it up. Have a look at it. And we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot, Ken.
Lovely. Thank you.